Thank you very much for coming to this seminar, and thanks to Luca also for being here today. So this seminar is part of a series of seminars that we organized through the chair UPF QS UPF, so about computational technologies for healthcare. So this is a collaboration between UPF and Foundation, which is a consortium of companies, radiology groups, but also there's company in genomics. So we're mostly focused on assistential activities in clinics, and there the idea to build this chair is to investigate the possibilities to have a better uptake of technologies, so in the service of the patients, and also to involve patient associations, so really the community, so into this development. So Luca is here now in this context. So Luca is Emili. He is CEO and founder of Silico Technologies, which is one of the first companies that actually fosters the development of medical devices, pharmacological products, and also aims to improve medical trials by using models and simulations. So Silico is really at the front line of the use of modeling models and simulations, so in the clinical pipeline. And in this context, so they are a member of the Avecina Alliance, which is linked to the VPH Institute. It would be the corporate associative part of the VPH Institute. And they foster very strong communication with Food and Drug Administration in the US, with the European Commission, the European medical agencies, in order to establish a robust framework for the development and then the exploitation of models and simulation in medicine. Just to put the context.
Perfect.
So
thank you. Thank you, Jerome. Thank you for the invite, and thank everyone to be here. It's a pleasure to see that in the last few months, every time that we provide a speech about in silico trials, there is a need to add seats. So it's a good indication. So thank you very much again for this opportunity to talk about what we are doing in the modeling simulation world with the target to democratize the use of simulation in healthcare. Jerome already introduced myself. I will provide you just a couple of aspects linked to my bio. I have a degree in economy. I've been CEO of a cybersecurity startup for 10 years. I was in love with the internet since the beginning. So from 2000 to 2010, I was CEO of these cybersecurity startups. Then I went to my economy degree activity, doing consultancy, etc. In 2012, they asked me to liquidate a CRO. It's a company who manages clinical trial for pharma and medical devices company. And I found out the existence of clinical trials, because I was never aware about clinical trial until 2012. And I started to have a relationship with physicians, because before that I was only have friends that was lawyers or economists or business developers, sales and people. So I started to get into this world. And so we created a company called ProMeditech to deliver technology for clinical trial. In 2016, we had a very great opportunity to start to work and to think about what modeling simulation could do in this area. So we started in Silico Trials as a project. This is what we are going to explain to you today. So of course, every question, every interest you have, do not hesitate to ask me. I will let some time also at the end for some question, but I will also provide my details so you can contact me directly. So we started from a very, very simple consideration. There are industries like automotive, engineering, aeronautics, and aerospace, where the use of modeling simulation is 100% the starting point for the development of a new product. So I don't know if you're aware of that, but if you're doing a new airplane, if you're doing a new car, you are starting to using modeling simulation, and you develop significantly this product using modeling simulation instead of creating the real car, instead of creating a real airplane. In healthcare, it's not like that. In healthcare, the use of modeling simulation is quite limited. It's increasing, but it's not like it is in other industries. So we decided to make a platform that targeting specifically one aspect, to support pharma and medical devices company in the use of modeling simulation to reduce time and cost of R&D and approval of products, but also in the use of the modeling simulation in the daily care, because there is an opportunity to use modeling simulation not only in the pure R&D, but also once we have to treat patient. And this is something that is going towards the machine learning, artificial intelligence topic that every one of you and everyone around now is hearing about, and very few people hear about modeling simulation in front of AI. But what is important with modeling simulation is that this could be a very great starting point to apply machine learning and artificial intelligence, because you have to train this model, and to train this model to have something already done in a traditional way could be quite significant. You can see here a couple of screenshots of some project we're working on, we will mention later on, with FDA, to evaluation of a patient in oncology area, or to treat Alzheimer's. So as you can see, different topic from medical devices up to patient, up to drugs. So what we're doing is basically linked to this vision. We want to democratize the access of modeling simulation. So we want that more people using modeling simulation without also having experience of modeling simulation directly, but having synergy with researchers. So working a lot with researchers that are doing models, that are doing simulation, and that at the moment have a significant problem to take what they're doing to the market. Because once you're doing a software for simulation where you're doing a model, you are not using the technology that can protect it. So what is defined in other area like video, entertainment, or music and so on, digital right management tools, is not applied to modeling simulation. So you can't protect your model, you can't protect your geometry, you can't protect your design. There's a significant problem that is limiting these models to be used by third parties, because you can say, this is my model, download it and use it. Yeah, you can say it, but you are losing every kind of IP on that, you're losing any kind of control on what's happening on that, and so this is what is limiting this approach. And this specific vision was something that FDA embraced a couple of years ago, because they have, of course, they had the need to control what the people is doing with what they're developing, and they have decided to, they have proposed us, let me say, to make a partnership. We have signed a research collaboration agreement with them July last year. It's a 5 years collaboration agreement to put part of their knowledge, let me say, through modeling simulation, available to companies. So the people is able to use models developed by FDA, or by us with FDA, to understand, for example, on the specific project, what they look for in terms of MRI safety for implanted medical device. Then after a couple of months, also EMA approached us asking to collaborate with them on a part of the process, but a little bit different, because they are asking to be part of the cybersecurity consultative group they have created. So I am a member of this group in EMA, working on the best practices and application of a cybersecurity aspect in the EMA activity, and linked, of course, to life science. So drugs, because maybe you are aware of that in the US there is FDA managing drugs and medical devices, also with food, because FDA stands for Food and Drug Administration. So they manage medical device and drugs, and also they manage food approval. About 30% of all the business in US is approved, let me say, by FDA, because they overrule something that is significant there. In Europe it's different. We have EMA working on the drugs, and then we have notified bodies that work on the approval of medical devices. So we have these three pillars. We work on regulations, so we're collaborating with regulators. We have science coming from partners we have that are providing us their own model. to have it on the platform, and we are working on technology because the cloud, the HPC, I mean, these new things are impacting a lot the opportunity to make a simulation instead of a desktop or a little cluster that company or little company can have inside. This is a traction we had. So we started, as I said, the project on, for modeling simulation on medical device in 2016. Then we started to discuss with FDA. In 2017, we became board member of the Aviation Alliance. We signed the 5-year collaboration agreement with FDA, and things are going up to the last activity we have done in Zaragoza. It was the beginning of September, where I said we have presented the project to a lot of researchers, and there was a need to add seats because the opportunity to put on the platform their model was considered quite interesting. What are where we are working? So what is the context? The market is significant. So we have a researcher on one side and we have a company on the other side. But how many of them? What are they doing? You have to consider that the investment in R&D for pharma and medical device company is an incredible amount. So we're talking about something like $70–80 billion per year, managed by thousands of companies around the world. So they have the need to reduce the time and costs of this expenditure because it's really significant, and the time to take a new idea to the market is very long. FDA started with the new commissioner, Scott Gottlieb, to push a lot towards modeling simulation, basically considering this approach as a way to help company to speed up the R&D, to reduce the time that now, for example, for a drug is 12 years. So from the first molecule up to be on the market, it takes 12 years. And the average investment is $2.6 billion for a new drug to reach the market. So it's a huge amount, very complex to manage, and that don't let to take risks, too much risk, because if you go in a wrong direction, you risk to waste millions of euro or dollars. So we and you are lucky because you start to working and you start to be engaged in modeling simulation in a moment where in healthcare this is a topic that is becoming a hot topic. Where are the area where FDA is telling you could use modeling simulation? I insist on the regulatory aspect because the healthcare in general is highly regulated. So you can't think about you're doing a drugs or you're doing something as a medical device if you don't consider the impact on the regulators aspect, because the regulators define how you can do it, how you can manage it, how you can sell it. So if it is possible, also as a student, to consider since the beginning what regulators are going to ask, it's important, because if you go in a direction that then will be the one that they will require, you avoid inefficiency. Because there will be a moment in a project of R&D, once it has to become something that go to market, of course, that you will have to comply with regulations. And if you know it since the beginning, it's better than just to understand at the end that you have to do the things like this. Like, for example, you have to validate the computer you are using for the collection of data, because otherwise these data are not good for a clinical trial. So let's go to the regulator idea of how and where you can use modeling simulation. So here you can see that they say you could simulate a device, or how a device is working in a patient, or you can simulate the anatomy to make some evaluation of that. Then physiology, chemical toxicology, quite important, because how something is going to impact with the patient in terms of biology. 3D printed. Now we're going to a lot of opportunity with 3D printing system or additive manufacturing system that could produce something for the patient. But how are you going to test it? How are you going to check it? It's something we will see later on. Then you can make a simulation in a device like Medtronic has done for some insulin pump. You can simulate the device as well. So you can make the simulation become a device. So the simulation is a software that tells, for example, to physicians that have to put a stent where to put a stent based on the geometry of the arteries or cardiovascular aspect of the patient, and so on. So a lot of opportunities on the environment is quite wide. This is an example of a, provided by FDA of a digital evidence linked to pacemaker, for example, where this is done by Medtronic, where you can compare how the modeling could substitute or integrate in part the traditional in vivo validation of a device. I will not go in detail, we will have this presentation available, but just to say that not only little company, but especially big company are pushing a lot of effort in the use of modeling simulation to leverage this kind of opportunity and knowledge, saving potentially millions of dollars. These are other examples, so simulation in orthopedics, simulation in cardiovascular, so you can simulate how the stent is going to expand, simulation in spine, so how some rod for scoliosis are going to work, impact of electromagnetic on the head in terms of mobile phone, or you can see there aortic valve that can provide you indication of what is the pressure, performance, and so on. So this is another, you say, forecast or desired by FDA that is telling that now the computer support just a little part of the creation of digital evidence in a medical device, but what they envision is that in the future, considering virtual patient and consider computer, it will be able to reach up to 50% of the creation of digital evidence. What's the in silico trials? What's an in silico clinical trial? Basically, is an approach that would do not just deliver a simulation, but put together different components linked to anatomy, physiology of a patient, use condition, the physics of the device. For example, if you go to medical device that you want to test, and you put all these components together, of course, adding variability in terms of geometry, material, load cases, and uncertainty, because it's not something that is certain only because you're doing it on computer. You have to add uncertainty like empirical considerations, stochastic evaluation, and so on. And in the end, if you put all these things together, what you create is an in silico trial. So you're experimenting on virtual patient, what is possible to do on real patient, but with, as I said, extreme efficiency in terms of time and also with a reduced cost. And the more that you're using your model through the different stage of the experiment or stage of trials, you can increase the model maturity, and so the in silico part can take a more significant value inside the evidence you are creating. So now, once the company are doing a traditional clinical trial, maybe there is something in silico that can support what they're doing. It's bigger in pharma than in medical device now, but in general, the normal PI approach everything through traditional clinical trial. But the more you're going to use model to make them more efficient, to make more reliable, to make more validated, or let me say to make them validated, this opportunity is going to change. And in the future, instead of enrolling 20, 300, 600 patients in a trial, potentially it will be possible to enroll less patient, significantly less patient, doing same activity or more activity of evaluation through modeling simulation. This is what everyone is targeting here, working in this industry, because the management of a patient, the enrollment of a patient in a trial is something very, very complex, very expensive. You can consider that on drug, to enroll a patient could cost $50,000, one patient. For other activity, if you have to use, for example, an animal, if you have to, for something that is linked to cardiac aspect, you have to use a pig. The cost of a pig, use of pigs in an animal experiment is $20,000–$30,000 or euro. So it costs a lot also to use animals. So if you are able to move from animal use or for patient engagement into the use of in silico, we create a lot of efficiency. This is where the company are looking at. This is one of the drivers that would help this kind of technology increase their value. So how we work in this environment? Basically, as we are a platform like Amazon or Spotify, just to name some example that are quite simple, we do not create our own model. We are doing in some case, but basically we do not create our own model. What we're doing is to have the web-based platform where models or virtual patient or data sets or solver come from the partners. We put them together in our platform, and then we let especially the people, so people from companies, other researchers or clinicians, use it in an easy way with very easy to use interface with something that is let me say, not only for scientists, accessible through the internet, and using the cloud as a way to have significant computational capacity on demand with a very reduced cost. So this is a different business model from what's existing now in a computational modeling environment, because this not only provide to people that don't have the significant modeling knowledge to access to this kind of environment, but give the opportunity to people that develop models to provide their own model to companies without a significant problem in terms of IP, in terms of dealing with agreement on how much does it cost, how are you going to use it, how are you going to trace it. Because we are dealing with the technology transfer offices of the university, we define this contract, and then the model on the platform is sold through, in terms of use, through the in silico trials engagement with the final company. So once the model is online, the company is able to provide his own input. So they find something already available, already existence. They provide a specific input for the test, ISO testing of that implanted medical device for hip, or they were able to provide indication of how the stent is created for MRI safety, or they're able to evaluate if there is an impact of a cardiotoxicity of that compound. And then the system around the cloud provide outcome and report also based on what the regulator is asking for, and then you can work on the optimization of the parameters. Why, for example, this is important in Europe now? Because, I don't know if you're aware of that, but in 2017, the European Union has been released this new version of medical device regulation. So there is a new law that is telling company how to approve medical device. And this is changing a lot. I will not go into detail, but the term that is creating a lot of problem around the medical device world is the creation of sufficient clinical evidences. So the creation of sufficient clinical evidences means that for a lot of medical device, until a couple of years ago, it was quite simple to go to market having a CE mark. Now it's not enough. So they have to create clinical evidences to convince the notified bodies, who are the people that decide if a product can go to market or not, that the device they are producing is good. And this is going to be applied also on the medical devices that are already on the market. So we are talking about hundreds of thousands of medical devices to be approved or reapproved. And what is quite interesting is that in this new MDR, there is a reference to modeling simulation. So the preclinical and clinical data have to be provided, but also, for example, as you can see on the left, results of tests, okay, as engineering, lab, or simulated use. So the simulation could become part of the request of approval of a medical device, at least to reduce the number of clinical evidences that you have to gain from patients or from hospitals that are very hard and very expensive to obtain. So there's also this reference to computer modeling in terms of a requirement to be met by the notified bodies. So it's a word. It's a word that gives opportunity. It's not something that everyone is running to that now, because the people have to understand how to approach a new MDR, but it's significant for the modeling world that this is something that could be used in the future for the approval of medical devices. In US, 21st September 2016, they've been released this guidance for on how to report modeling simulation results to FDA, because they were receiving so much results of modeling simulation that they weren't able to apply a common way to evaluate them, because everyone was promoting a modeling simulation based on different point of view. So someone provided 10 sheets, someone else was providing 100 sheets, some other was providing a book for modeling simulation and validation of what they were done. And so if they said, okay, we appreciate you providing us all this model, but please, this is their reason of a guidance. So they're not saying you have to do that, but please, can you, once you provide, or why don't you follow this guidance when you provide us the results of modeling simulation? So it's easier for us to know everything you have done and to have all the aspects considered in terms of information provided. And this is creating a quite interesting first step that put in the hand of modelers, engineers, an element related to regulators. Because this is where the outcome of the models, where the outcome of the simulation is going to. So just a couple of case study to show you some example of how then the application of these technologies or this regulation can end up. The first one is the project we are doing with FDA. So the one linked to the agreement of a collaboration we have signed last year, and it has a specific focus. We are using a model developed by FDA using a solver developed by ANSYS. It's called HFSS. It's a model for electromagnetic safety that gives the opportunity to company to evaluate the MRI safety of the implanted medical device. So basically you can see here some screenshot, and the component is that the simulation is developed by FDA. The engine is provided by ANSYS, but what's happening online is on our platform, because this is where the user can see an easy interface with data, with easy interface with tools that they wouldn't be able to create by themselves. Also, the cost of this kind of technology is significant. So how does it work? Let's go to the technical aspect. So first of all, we have this radio frequency coil model defined following the ASTM standard for the creation of the phantom. So there is not a real body, there is a phantom of gel, saline gel that represent the consistency of the human body, where the medical device is, let me say, implanted. So this is a stent that is put in a place of this phantom. And then we define the radio frequency exposure, then we define the material properties of the stent. There are parameters that can be defined by the user, and everything run on the cloud. The machine who's running it takes about 2 hours to run a simulation, and there is a machine with 200 gigabytes of RAM and 16 cores. So something that for a company wouldn't be easy to have inside. The cost for this machine would be something like 20,000 euro. The cost if to run, only from the computational point of view, the simulation in the cloud is in the order of dozens of euros. So completely different scale. But this means that you can do it, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to do it. And once the simulation is run, you will create results of the map in terms of temperature rise or average standard absorption rate, so can provide you indication, visual indication of what is the impact. So you don't need to be an engineer to see that red means that there is a heating, significant heating of this medical device or not. Because yeah, the problem in the background, I give for granted because I'm here as in the engineering field, but maybe not one of you is aware of that. Once you go with metal under MRI, as the MRI creates an electromagnetic field, the electromagnetic field impact on the metal part and increase the temperature. So you could have a heating that could be 2 degrees, 3 degrees, and that's not bad. But if there is a potential heating of 30 degrees or 20 degrees inside the body, if you sum 36 plus 20, you reach cells of your body that are in contact with long time with something that is 556 degrees. And the outcome is not so nice. So there is indication of temperature, and the outcome is already structured in the way that FDA is asking for. So the engineer don't have to think about how I have to put together all the information to provide this to FDA, but the system do it by itself. So we have this component, they take in all the part of the simulation, also require some text to be combined to create the report for FDA. And in the future, probably for notified bodies in Europe. This is another example linked to orthopedics, where, for example, starting from the orthopedic device digital twin, we let the user define parameters linked to something that they know, because they know everything about the device, they don't know something about the modeling simulation. But we ask them only something about medical device. They can select the different tests they want to do, and ISO testing or other tests linked, for example, also to functional outcome, so the walking and different kind of simulation. And the final result is, again, a report based on what FDA is asking. With the fact that all this data, so input, output, and etc., are managed in a database. So we're not dealing with a pure solver, we are dealing with a platform that is able to manage all the data, all the information in the database, so that lets you create a report in different way, create a history of data, and so on and so on. So an approach to modeling simulation that put other tools in support to the modelers in a way that the input and the output are managed not through Excel spreadsheet or through text files, but into something that is structured. So I can also create a quality process based on the data, because the treatment of this data is significantly similar to the treatment of data in a clinical trial that require for the management of data very specific procedures called good clinical practices. This is another example of application we have done with a company. They are developing a medical device 3D printed that you can see here. So what it asked us to do was to start from patient-specific geometry. The need was an osteotomy. So you make a cut here. This is a femur. No, the femur is, yeah, it's the tibia, sorry. Yeah. The tibia, you make the cut here, and then you change the angle of the plate. So if you have some legs that are not aligned, then through the years you really damage significantly the knee and the cartilage, etc. So everything goes bad. But if you change the geometry, you can avoid the replacement of a knee for a lot of years. And the time and the cost is very reduced. So what was the idea? Not to go with generic plate that you can put on the patient, but to develop the plate based on the outcome of simulation, on how I have to change the geometry on one side and how I have to design the plate to better fit with the patient femur, tibia. So it's a circle, let me say, but the outcome is that you have a patient-specific component that you're going to 3D print, design on the basis of some of the modeling simulation run to find out the optimal geometry of the patient knee. And of course, you're going to design this to avoid significant stress, for example, in point like this, where you can see there is the hole for the screw, and there is a point where it's maximum stress. And here, the hole is here, and the stress is distributed through this part of the plate. So you also reduce the performances of the medical device. So where the opportunity to then, in general, apply into the medical device the simulation? You could do device development or validation. You could use it as a decision support system. So you have to decide what is the best implant for this patient. You could run a simulation to see if the implant A is better than implant B. Unfortunately, there are a lot of error, or maybe there are error in the daily practice for a lot of reasons. And to have a decision support system can help the physician to reduce the number of error, to have at least something like the spell check of word that is telling them, listen, here, maybe if you do that, you could have a problem. And also in terms of personalized prosthesis, the 3D printing could help, could be helped by simulation, reducing the number of devices that you 3D print and maybe goes wrong because you are not able to test as well. You are testing the traditional medical device that you produce through your complex process of a machine and then a regulator's review and so on. Because if you're doing patient specific, how are you going to test it? It's very hard. With modeling simulation, you are able to test it. Of course, it's going to apply into the drug as well. This is an example of how in the drug development, starting from in vivo trial exploration, development of the model, define of parameters and then variables intrinsic or extrinsic to the model, you're able to, for example, go to dose regimen, efficacy, safety evaluation, and to find the right dosing for a drug. So I don't go in detail now with this, but in the drug area, there are a lot of models highly valuable. So for many of the drug approved, there is use of modeling simulation. But what is interesting is that there are more and more interaction among drugs and medical devices. So the combination of the different model could be in the future significantly an element to focus on, because we go to the multi-scale modeling, but not multi-scale because we are doing mechanical and fluid dynamics or electromagnetic, but because we are going also to the biology. So we combine biology with multi-scale modeling to medical devices. So a quite interesting environment, not to create the virtual physiological human 100%, but at least to work on some aspect and to increase more and more the knowledge embedded in the software and making this software available to the highest number of users as possible, to avoid that they start from scratch or they not have an opportunity to access something very usable that thanks to actual IT technology is easy to distribute. In the past, it was hard to distribute something because you had to create a product. Now, with the internet, it's very simple, it's very efficient from the economical point of view to create something to make other people access it and use it. Because the incremental cost for the use of the single component is very low. I will skip this one just to go on the application of what is called MID3, so Model Informed Development Drug Discovery. So the pharma part of use of models, where I can use it. I can use for validation of hypothesis I'm having on a drug. I can use for decision support for clinical scientists, also in the preclinical activity. I can use it for individualized dosing. So I could use a model that receive a lot of input on a patient-specific characteristic to define the right dosing for that patient. And if I started to use this model through the entire workflow of development, I have the opportunity to leverage something that have been passed and validated, different stage, like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then when it's on the market is significantly valuable to provide outcome to physicians they're going to prescribe one drug. And the drugs are not just one pill per day. Sometimes our drugs are quite complex. They need to be taken in combination with others, with dosing specific, and so it's a tricky problem sometimes. And so considering this as a pathway to develop a drug, so from target selection up to life cycle management, you can see there are many aspects where it's possible to use and to deliver models from preclinical development to late clinical development. So a lot of potential here that have to be considered, especially once you look at something that can impact also on the medical device part, because if we are able to create this convergency, this could be really, really great. I was talking about 3D printing. Very quickly we'll go through this technology. This is a company we acquired this year called Concept.com. This is focusing on the testing of 3D printed medical device, just to give you another point of view of application of modeling simulation. So Concept was doing engineering simulation for, in this case, a rotor, but pump and stuff like that, so not medical. And we have decided to, so this was the model and the outcome, so fluid dynamics, for example, using, in this case, OpenFOAM as a solver, is a open source solver, but for structural simulation using Codaster is another open source solver for structural testing. And we said, well, it's really interesting, but not to be applied in a medical device. Sorry, not to be applied in mechanical, but to apply in a medical device. Where? Where there is need? The 3D printing. Because 3D printing, at the moment, is creating a new market, complete new market, and is creating also some different needs to approach this market and to create this kind of product. Because the way you are producing the traditional product is changing completely. But this means that also the 3D printing engineers and designers need specific technical tools and knowledge and approach to make it, because otherwise you can't think that you are going to forge something or you're going to do something like extrusion if then you're going to 3D print it, because you are losing the flexibility that 3D printing is providing you. So, what we have done is to approach one of the criticality in the 3D printing education and training, the fact that to make something 3D printed, you need a 3D printer, you need to 3D print it to test it if you have done something good or not. But this requires a lot of money, a lot of investment, also for something that you're going to throw away after your test. And we have thought that a technology like Concept could be used to, instead of printing real objects to check and test them in the real world, to design something and then with modeling simulation check and test this virtual object in the virtual world without printing it. So with the opportunity to make, instead of going directly to 3D print something, once you have designed it, to launch a simulation, to launch a test, and you can see if at least there are some big problem or not. And then I can decide to 3D print it. So I avoid to lose time because a 3D print of a hip prosthesis or something like that, or a patient-specific bone for part of bone for a patient could take hours and a lot of money. But if you don't run a test before it, you risk to throw it away, money and time. A simulation like this could take half an hour, 1 hour, and then you have the results, and you can see if there is something wrong, you can change it. It's like spell check for Word. Now everyone is using it because it's helping to avoid the error. Or like the ABS for cars. Everyone is using it because if you're driving on the snow, on rain, and so on, it helps you to avoid the error. So we're saying, why don't try to avoid error in 3D printing using modeling simulation? Could be useful, but it has to be very easy, very immediate in terms of access. So what we're doing with some institution, with also some university, starting from US, is that the 3D printing training has this virtual 3D printing component that help the people make a significant exercise. I mean, if you're an artist and you want to do something that is just 3D printed but for something nice to see, it's fine. But if you're doing 3D printing for something that is mechanical, they need to have mechanical properties and characteristics, you will be able to understand if this works only if you do the real testing on the bench. And something that could be simple, like let's imagine you have to design a spoon. Okay, you have to 3D print a spoon with plastic. Is 1 millimeter enough for a spoon that have to take soup, or you have to make it thick 2 millimeters or 5? You can say every time, let's do 10 centimeters because I'm sure that with 10 centimeters it's going to break. So you have to find out how to optimize it, and the simulation could be a way to make it. So this is basically the process. So you create the simulation case, you apply 3D printed design, you select a printing material, you apply load the constraint, and then you obtain the results virtually tested very easily, very quickly. I was talking about the combination of medical device and drugs. This is an example of a project we're working on. So you can see here CFD based on nasal cavity with drugs that is provided to the patient through the nasal cavity. And what we are able to evaluate is a quantity of drug that is going to be deposited on the part of the nose where there is the absorption, because this drug have to reach other part of the body, and the absorption can evaluate, so what is called PK is integrated, so the pharma evaluation of the pharmacokinetics is evaluated in combination with the specific airflows that take the drugs into the point where there is the absorption from the patient. So going to just the FDA summary, because I mentioned this because it's the most advanced environment working on modeling simulation. They are pushing towards modeling simulation using the in silico methods. There is a lot of working group working on that. So if they are very open, and the information on the internet are significant. And I can say that at the moment FDA is leading the application of modeling simulation in medical devices, also in the drugs. But in drugs also EMA is working on that. But they are doing great job on drugs, both of them. But in medical device, there are no other organization like FDA around the world. And so we are very happy because they are starting to promote what is called good simulation practices. That is a concept applied to simulation, similar to what's happening in the clinical trial with good clinical practices. So the clinical trial is a real clinical trial if you're applying good clinical practices. Otherwise, it's just an experiment that no one is going to consider. So there is these practices developed through years to consider how to manage data and patient and informed consent and so on. If you want that modeling simulation become in the healthcare with the same approval rate or with the same acceptance of what is the traditional clinical trial, we expect that the good simulation practice is something that really could benefit. So to define an approach, not only in the engineering aspect of the pure simulation, but the entire process that need to be managed and defined. This is we're very lucky, as we said, with FDA. We also were very lucky with Microsoft, because they have proposed us to work on the evaluation of the guidelines for GXP. The GXP stands for good clinical practice, good manufacturing practice, good laboratory practice, good whatever you want. X stands for that. And so it means that we have reviewed how Microsoft with the Azure cloud worldwide is complying with the GXP requirement. And this is something very important because not all the cloud is compliant with the GXP. And the life science company, so healthcare, so medical devices, pharma, but also hospital, we need to move in an environment that are GCP compliant or GXP compliant in general if they want to comply with the regulation. And this is one significant step to make it easier to accept the outcome of simulation to be in an environment like this. So, reaching my last slide, you can see here we have an office in the US. We have office in Italy in 2 areas. Then we have also an office since some month in the Netherlands. And that's all. I hope that, yeah, we've been in time. So we have some minutes for some questions. Thank you.
Well, Luca, thank you very much for this great talk. So, questions?
Yeah, I have a question a bit about the process. So you showed an example, for example, the first one was an example where both the simulation and the final user was FDA.
Yeah.
But I guess
Yeah, no, the final user in that case are the companies.
Okay.
So the FDA, with us, has created this platform where the company are able to use the simulation to see what FDA is asking for about MRI safety. So it's what is called regulatory science.
Mm-hmm.
So FDA has developed it. We are working with them on that, but the company is using that. Now we have dozens of users of that component, but they are from company that otherwise they wouldn't know how to approach MRI safety.
But I mean, in the more general case where you have a need, let's say that this, I guess you have two ways of working. One that is more push, one more pull. You have a need from whatever, a manufacturer or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you have to find suitable providers of simulation technology.
Yep.
That meet the specs.
Yeah.
So what are these specs? Because in a sense you have to use simulation models that are well validated. That
the point is that we don't need for a specific topic hundreds of different models. We just need one or two that are good. And around the world, there are more than 300 research centers developing models, only on medical devices around the world. So the point is that once we have a model that is validated, published, maybe with clinical evidences, etc., this becomes a very great candidate to become the model that we look to integrate. And most of time, this model is not used everywhere else. These are used internally for research. And we give the opportunity to put this model on the platform and to sell it. And they receive royalties, so they pay for that. So basically, we make a selection based on criteria, so scientific criteria. And once we have the model, what we are seeing with the model we are already on the platform is that the intensive use of the model online can create a lot of value as a feedback to the developer that maybe model in the same context that are closed because they are used only at a single university can't receive because they don't have use cases. And so this is, let me say, I wouldn't say this is going to become sort of TripAdvisor for modeling simulation where then the user can say, yeah, this is good, this is not good, I like it or not, but I mean, this is the direction that most of the knowledge or the activity on the internet is going to. So to have the interaction for the user and the outcome and the output and the feedback of the user impact also on the future possibility to develop the model. But if you're not there, you don't receive outcome, you don't receive output, you don't receive feedback. So.
I have two questions. One is more or less related to the training that you mentioned that is quite expensive, and also the way that platforms are used. So when a user, a candidate company, I don't know, wants to try one of the models, do they have from your side some sort of consultancy? Because I suppose that these models are extremely complex and you have to be quite an expert. Because I saw that, for example, okay, the example where the clinician downloads the information to make a decision, but does the clinician know how to set the parameters right? Does the clinician know how to interpret the results correctly?
Yeah.
I understand that the idea is to democratize, but at the same time, is it safe? Is there some help from your sides to help you?
Yeah, there is help. In fact, in this phase of development of the platform, we are working more on project that just to have the self-service online where the people go and use the model by themselves. So we have this component also of training and support and consultancy. What we are doing is also to complement the model with information for training, like webinar on the specific model, training materials, and so on, in a way that it will be possible for the people that are going to use the model to train by themselves. But also what we ask to the researcher that are providing us a model is the opportunity to be engaged in consultancy or training or a specific project, because when there is something significantly complex, they need some support. The fact that the interaction with the researcher is possible with a specific fee, or they decide how to do it, we can of course provide this to the final user. The model don't become our own model. The model are, let me say, branded by the researchers. So we explicitly say that this is developed by researcher A or B or C. And then with the researcher, the agreement we are doing is linked also to the opportunity to have the engagement or not based on the request that we receive from customers.
So how is that it's going to be automatic if you need?
Well, once you run the simulation, you create out results of the simulation. The report requested by FDA require also some input text, so it's not that it's possible to create everything automatically, but it's not something that we're doing. It's something that the engineer that are doing the simulation define, because it's applied specifically to their product. So we do not intervene unless we don't require with a consultant activity. We don't intervene in that creation. This is something that automatically is done taking the information from the solver, and in part is done because the user put his own specific data or information or description into the form.
So another question is, how do you have, let's take any of the use cases that you've shown here. You haven't spoke about if the results are validated, or, I mean, do you use any validation process for those results?
We start basically from validated models. This is where we start. And we have validated the system who run the workflow. So the validated results are the combination of these two, but maybe more, let me say, validated activity. So first of all, you need to have a validated model, but also you need to validate the way you're managing the input, the way you're managing the output, and that the system where the validation, the software is running, so the model is running, is validated itself, is under computer system validation. So at the end, you can expect the validation level, let me say, of the results is higher than something that you run on a laptop without any kind of control. Of course, we are not only ourselves, but the people in modeling simulation is in a pathway of creation of content is more and more validated, because in these years we are moving from pure, let me say, bench testing to clinical validation. This is quite important in the drugs and medical device area, and this outcome are contributing to the validation of the results. It's very hard to have quickly and with no investment, significant investment, something validated since the beginning. It's going to be a process that improves through the time. That's the reason I have shown that the slide where the use of in silico trial is going to increase, because the more you're using, the more you provide outcome, the more you can make benchmarking, and the more the results become reliable, especially in an environment that is like the healthcare, so not, let me say, following only mechanical or physical rules like automotive or space. And we have to take in account that there are these biology aspects to be considered.
So what kind of arrangement do you have with the researchers? Do they just give you access to their models? Or?
No, they provide us the model. We integrate the model on the platform, and once the model is used, they receive, based on the pricing defined, etc., a royalty for that. But everything around the platform, because otherwise to create a connection to a model that is in a university would be very complex.
Actually, as far as I understand the business model, it's heavily based on the collaboration with public research, with public institutions.
Also
Because-
private, public and private.
Yeah, because when you say that modeling is cheaper than experimental, I think here there are some nuances, because the development of a model, so from
It's very
image
expensive.
acquisition, segmentation, checking of segmentation, geometrical validation, constitutive equations, verification of the constitutive equations, simulation cases, validation of simulation cases, then significance of the output, but that's you deal with.
Yeah.
That's indeed a very costly process. I mean, it
Absolutely.
can cost to salary one person full time during several years.
Yeah,
3
absolutely.
to 4 years for one model.
Yeah, the difference, I say it's cheaper, linked not to the creation of the first instance, but the use of it.
Yeah.
Because once you're doing that on bench or on clinical trial, every time you start from scratch, as you have the same cost every time replicated. Once you're using a model, you have a significant investment to create the model, but the added cost to run the model one time or 1,000 times is not so much. So that's the efficiency of the use of computer-based component. Instead of going to the real world where the time and the cost is more significant and it's not scalable. With models, it's scalable.
Can you say something about how to manage liability? I mean, in terms of if something happens,
Something happens.
Something happens, and the pharma company comes to you and says, no, because I use your software. And you go to the researcher, no, because and the researcher ends up with a fine of $3 billion. So I was wondering, how is this, I don't know.
Yeah. No, well, we are in a world where the things are already done. In terms that it's not that company are not working with the researcher because the researcher can't be liable on what you're doing. So we just copy the approach that is now used in research activity and we put it in the modeling simulation. So the expectancy of, we were talking about validation before, you can expect that only because it is a software is going to be precise 100%. You have to accept that there are some potential errors, some aspect that you have to check. The point is that the more you use it, the more you reduce the error, but you can't avoid them completely. So there is no opportunity to say and to sign contract where we are or the researcher is considered 100% liable on the outcome, because no one would bear that kind of responsibility in a world where potentially there are so significant costs. The point is that for the company, if they use the traditional methods and another method that using other starting point give them the opportunity to reduce the risk of what they are doing, this is significant for them as well. Of course, there is a risk translation, and also there is the need to be very, very clear about the outcome of a comparison of a tool with other methods to avoid to say it's 100% perfect. Also because when you go to software side, you know that there are errors anyway, because you can't have a software that is error-free. It doesn't exist. So if there is 10% or 20 or 5%, create a difference of quality of the model, of course, or it could be 50%, but at least it's more than zero. And if you have nothing, sometimes to have 80% of indication is better than nothing.
Yes, maybe I have a last one.
Yep.
That's indeed links to this liability, model validation, etc. I think model validation and the definition of a good model is extremely complex question. And that's, for example, so you take a model of a joint that can flex that much degrees under specific external force. You can validate your model that the model will reproduce a very specific experiment of so much flexion with specific force. However, when you start to look into the model and you look at the load transfer between the different model components, tissue, device, what you have here to implant it or whatever, you can see that here you can have 3 to 4 or whatever number of validated models that will give you very different answers in terms of this internal load transfer, which is what you're interested in when you use model, because you're so interested in having a clue about what cannot be measured.
Yeah.
And here, I think this is a problem that it's still unsolved in the simulation community. In general, people avoid this question. And so it brings a question on, to be safe, how you interpret your simulated values. Are you interpreting it as absolute values? So beyond or below this threshold, I'm safe or I'm not safe? Or are you interpreting the simulation outcomes in terms of relative mechanisms? So if I have this configuration, I have a mechanism that will give me, for example, concentration of stress, of strain, or molecules, whatever, in a specific area. If I have different configuration, then I have a shift of this area because of these specific interactions mechanism, which I think could be a much safer interpretation of the model and an exploitability of the models in the clinical world. So could you comment on this? Is this something that is already being discussed at the FDA level? Or?
Well, it's discussed continuously, because I mean the validation of the model, the reliability of the model is an element that is on every table of people doing modeling simulation. So we can't say, oh yeah, it's worked perfectly, it worked every time. The point is not how today it's better to do the things in a way or in another, because it's unsolved problem. I mean, a lot of people are working on that. But to think about what could be a pathway to create outcome in a way that in 2, 3, 5, 10 years, this problem is going to be reduced. And our approach, our idea is that if you let the people concentrate on one aspect that is significant, instead of everyone starting from scratch with their own specific knee model, and everyone reach a certain level of quality, let me say, and experiences and testing, because they don't have the money to do it as they would like, you risk to use the resources in not most efficient way. So probably what could be a way to go in the direction you're mentioning is to have in the future some basic stuff already done, available, where the people use as a reference, and then they start to work on the other aspect on top of that. Because otherwise, as I mentioned, there are 300 research centers around the world doing modeling simulation, but most of them use resources to start from scratch and to reach the same level without being able to tackle with this kind of sophisticated problem. And I think that to be concentrated with resources to work on this sophisticated problem, it's a matter of growing of the general knowledge and general expertise, and starting from basic tools that are already good, and then it can become very good, to become in the future perfect. The problem is that nowadays, too much time, you are in a condition where the outcome is not good for everyone. And so they are wasting money, because if they put that money or that expertise or that time into something that make the good go towards very good, would be better than start from scratch and do something that is mediocre. So I think it's more not a matter of science, it's a matter of how to create the amount of resources that can solve this kind of problem.
Yeah, create a reference.
To create a reference, probably, it's our opinion, but maybe to create a reference could simplify the work for a lot of people, because they would correlate what they're doing on something on top of the reference, and not to create their own reference, because otherwise you have 100 knee model around the world, but you need 100. Maybe you need 10, but on the 10 you need per each one a lot of sophistication, and someone could work on that part. Maybe, yeah. This is this is an idea, but yeah, exactly.
No? So, well, thank you again, Luca.
Thank you.